Hi, everybody. Welcome to Legacy Stories. This is Marija. Coua's here with me, and today we're going to talk about a topic that is a little bit sensitive. It's in the news, it's everywhere. I haven't much touched it on social media, and I know Coua hasn't either. So, being that we are kind of children of war, if you will, we have our own opinions and we kind of want to share them, and you have a right to your own opinion, whatever it is. We're not trying to change your mind. We're not trying to influence your opinion. We're going to share our opinions. Um, I have a few tips for people how to handle this. And you know what? Coua, how are you today? Let's start with that. How are you feeling mentally? I feel like a little bit on the edge with all of this, and it's everywhere. So, how are you feeling?
I um let's just say like last week when I really let it sink in, like my nervous system, like I felt like that anxiety, that frazzledness, that fear, it was like scramble when I really let that, oh my gosh, like this is really happening, sink in. That's what I felt. And I remember the day that I allowed myself to feel that, I was it
Wait, we didn't say what we're talking about. I'm like, wait, guys, we're talking about the current situation between Russia and Ukraine,
yes.
right? The alleged war that I don't think there's actually war yet, but there's things going on in the world.
Yeah.
So sorry, Kua, keep going.
We should have made that clear. But yeah, we're talking about that. And on that day, I actually declared like myself to have a rest day. And it's so funny, like God must have knew that I was going to be processing all of this. So then that day I just ended up not working anyway. So I'm like, that was actually perfect for me to be resting that day, and then for this to happen, so that I wasn't like having to think about work or whatever else, because I was just like doing a me day. And so then got into the frazzleness, and then I started doing what I normally do when these types of things happen. Like I researched the heck, like oh my god, what's happening? I want to know like every single little detail, and I get like Maria, like I get kind of crazy and obsessed. And then I get into this mode of like, oh no, like the world, it's kind of like the world's ending type of like drama that happens to me. Like, shit, oh my gosh, what does this mean for me and my family? Like, it's almost like my response to spiral. That is my default response, is to like spiral. And then the next day, it's like, oh wait, Coua, let's hold up here a little bit. Like, this isn't good for you. Like, you still have a business that you're trying to grow. You still have a family that you have to take care of, and other things that you need to be an adult about. So you cannot let this like consume you. So it's like my conscious mind like kicked back in the very next day. But that was last week. This week I feel like I'm doing much better. At the beginning of this week, I actually set an intention, like, okay, how do I want to handle this going forward? And I know we're going to get into those tips like later on in the show, but Maria, that, to answer your question, how am I doing, that is how I responded and how I am doing now. What about you?
Okay, so I love how we're opposite. I don't watch news. I have not watched news for years now. News does nothing for me. Um, Social media is all over the place. So what I do is, my husband, who loves to watch news, who loves politics, who loves knowing what's in the world, he'll usually sprinkle in information, and social media will sprinkle information, and I shut down. My total opposite response to you, to your research. I'm like, here's the scientist who shuts down. I shut down. And I did shut down. Like, for a minute, I shut down. And I just go to what I know, which is whatever is in the media and on the social media is very in my experience, biased. So I have to let the dust settle, because it's not like there's a nuclear war going on right now. I mean, I know there's stuff going on. I understand that part really well. But it's not like, this is more like politics ramping up and stressing us out more than stuff that's happening, right? So I shut down for a minute there. And then I slowly start to absorb, like, what is actually going on? What's this side actually saying? What's this side saying? And I start to, like, because whatever is in the media is one side. My husband reads all the news. He reads European news. He reads news from our countries. He reads all the news. So he's really good with all the information. And sometimes it would be really bad. And it doesn't stress him out. So he'll trickle in stuff, and I'll be absorbing this and absorbing that. And then I'll do some of my own research eventually. But I don't do it right away, because it's just like, I just go, nope, I'm out. Like, this sucks. I hate this. I'm out. Because I go to my 9-year-old kids, 8-year-old kids brain. That's like, I hate war. We're not doing this, as if I can stop it. So I totally go out. So tell me your experience kind of with war. You haven't directly experienced it, but your family has. So tell me your experience so far. And you know what? How has that affected you?
I think this is such an interesting question because, like you said, like I haven't directly experienced it, but I like indirectly I have, right? And so, like in my family, how I experience that is like it's like shut out, it's ignored, it's avoided, it's like what's not talked about. And I think that is because it's very painful. No one wants to relive that. Like just in recent years, oh my gosh, I'm getting emotional. You're the one that called this out at the beginning, and I was thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm fine. But I feel all of this emotion coming up inside of me, um, because I was saying like just in recent years, my dad has actually finally started talking about what went on like with him and his family during the war, how it affected them, how they had to escape their country. Like he's finally started talking about that and how, I mean, that was decades ago. So it's taken him this much time to not even heal, but I think maybe to begin healing and to begin to actually think about these painful memories, to actually be able to express them to his children. So that is my experience of war. And like I said, I did not experience it directly, but indirectly, I feel like it is in my cells, like that generational trauma that we talk about often. I think it is why it is probably hard for me to open up to people right away because I have this like block inside of me that it's like I can't explain it, Maria, but it's there and I feel it and it's things that I'm working through. But the block is that it's something painful. Like if I open up, it'll be something painful. It's going to be emotional and I don't want to deal with that. And that's kind of like how I've lived with quote unquote war growing up until very recently when, you know, I dove into self-help and it's like, oh, I'm finding out all this information on how to deal with all that's going on inside of me.
It's it kind of, even though you were not in the war, the fact that your parents had to leave their home and had to escape, it always affects the children because of the attitude of the parents. The parents were forced to leave. They did not choose to. That means they carried all of this stuff, which means you felt it as you were growing up. Not only that you were an immigrant, but you were not there necessarily voluntarily. I mean, That's basically what it comes down to. And kids feel it. But my experience was direct experience because I was born in Yugoslavia and that was falling apart as I was growing up. So actually, there were bombs falling in our town. My dad was in the war. My friend's parents were in the war, like fathers were in the war. Our city that was mixed, Muslim population and Orthodox population. The Muslims had to move out first, for safety of people because the lines were moving and everything. And they moved out. They had to leave their houses. Then later, we had to move out and our house was burned down. And I remember like the sirens to go and hide. It wasn't as traumatic as some other cities that had it worse. As a kid, at that moment, I don't think you even perceive it. I just know that I hated it. And I know I always blame politicians for wars. And because I grew up with kids in mixed neighborhood where, we all look the same. We're not different, mostly like in our features. So it's not like you know who's what
Yeah.
religiously, but we're religiously different. So you grow up playing with kids and going to school with kids, and then they had to move out. And, you know, everybody loses in a war. All the sides lose because, for me, it's a loss. If kids lose parents, if they lose fathers, that's a loss. It's not just bomb falling in like family or like whatever. It's a loss on all sides. I don't think you ever win in a war. War is a political game, and that's my 9-year-old brain talking. And I've done a lot of thought work and self improvement, and these are the thoughts that I've found. And I'm like, no, I'm keeping them. People are like, no, maybe, being involved and understanding what happens in the world. I'm like, no, I like how the 9-year-old has figured this out. I was very little, but I figured this out, age 8 or 9, or I was right in there somewhere, third grade, and I hated it all. I'm just like, nobody can build this war. This is stupid. And ever since then, I've thought about it that way. And, as you grow older, you learn more and more. And it kind of it makes humanity a little bit, you understand it. And it also makes it a little bit disgusting to you in the sense that you understand that everybody is a human and people really can separate each other, like being like other. We can separate away from each other by our differences. We can put other people in a group of like, oh, they. And for us, it was religious. It was nationality. It was religion. Like, we're Serbian, like, or whatever, like they're Croatian or like all of that. It's separated by the republics, and then by religion on top of that, which made it worse. So people putting people into different camps, it separates them emotionally in a way that we then don't treat each other as people treat people. So it's that other, it's like that they, it's that kind of like as if we're not all the same. And that is a little bit when you realize what people do in wars and what happens in wars. And just to be clear, Balkan has been in war for generations. I don't think there's a generation that did not, for centuries, like Ottoman Empire. We had our own wars. We had war, like there was wars. Every generation had one or two wars that they survived and went through. So there's a lot going on there. And just all of that and hearing all those stories and hearing what actually happens in wars. My grandmother, when we were little, shared some stories from her experience from the Second World War when she was a little girl. Some of the stories are just like tragic and horrific, and you get a little bit disgusted with humanity. But then you also understand that when that separation happens, whatever the humans are doing, in a way, they're doing it because they think it's right. Like, it doesn't mean it's right to happen, but everybody's doing what they think is right. So even if I hate politicians, I don't think politicians are sitting there being like, yeah, let's totally destroy this nation. Let's just end this. they're thinking that this is important for our people, this is important, like, and that otherness is playing a big role in politics, and that otherness has existed for a really long time. It's just part of being human and part of being a part of society, because as society form, we have different societies, different cultures, and that is great because we live in more peace as we're part of specific cultures, but then the cultures between themselves have that otherness. So I don't know. It's kind of hard to explain. In my head, it makes sense. I'm like, imagine if we did not have cultures. If we just were like let alone, people would be like, there was no religions, there was no wars, there was, God knows what would be happening if there was no that morality, that culture, that little bit of that, what is transmitted generational. It would be chaos. But on the other hand, when that exists, that itself divides us a little bit. So yeah, that's where I'm coming from. I'm like, I'm keeping my 9-year-old brain still, and I'm looking at the situation and just thinking, nobody's gonna win here, and hoping it doesn't escalate to anything further. Like, not there, in my eyes, like, there's no side that's right or wrong, because each side is fighting for what they believe in, but both sides are gonna lose because they're both gonna lose people. You can't win. And that was a long one.
Once in a while. And like I was silent there because like honestly I'm just really receiving everything that you're saying, Maria, because it is very deep. And obviously like you put a lot of thought into this and you're going back to inner child basically. So that is some deep work, and it is like I really felt it in my heart when you were talking. And a couple things you said that just really stood out to me. You talked a lot about division, and the thing that kept coming up in my head is like differences like keep dividing us, and us as in like the people, all humans in general. Like we keep seeing this everywhere, or this is what the media is portraying, that differences equal division rather than differences can equal acceptance. And I think that most of us, if we're consciously living, that's what we're striving for. Yes, we know that everyone is different, and we still, guess what? We still accept you. You still get to be who you are. And then the other thing that you were talking about is I heard it's like these people have such a strong cause, and you're saying like it's not that it's like right, but it's so right to them because they believe in it so much. And that translated to me as like they have a very strong story that they are telling themselves, and it is so strong, and they've replayed it so many times in their head that they have now taken action. And I think that shows us the power of our minds, that people can put into action something that was just an imagination. And it's like that's so wonderful when it's used for good, and then when you see it used like this, it's like, oh crap, that is so scary, like super scary. And then one final thing I want to touch on, you mentioned humanness, and i I don't know if this is weird or not, but I do like to watch like not the news on TV, but then I'll catch up on the news on like Instagram, or like I'll watch the news on Facebook. And I like to do that because it's a reminder of humanness. I love watching the stories. Yes, it is heartbreaking, but it like reminds me like at the end of the day, these people, both sides, they are humans. And that like it's something about that like just allows it to like I allow it to just like sink into me that this is devastating, and I don't need to be going through it to feel it too. Does that make sense?
Yes, but not the way that you think. That kind of empathy. Um, so in college days, somebody who I knew, who I worked with, um, who had to evacuate their family from our war because the marriage that they were in was a mixed marriage, like religiously mixed marriage. And right away, at the beginning of the war, the families with mixed marriages were removed. They could leave the country. So they were not going to tear up the families, right? And this guy actually teared up his own family uh, because it's really hard having, watching the news and seeing what both sides are doing and then feeling guilty and feeling angry. So the family ended up, his family specifically, not all of them, but his family ended up being teared up. And I felt really sad about it. But there was a moment where he was feeling bad about himself and he was crying. He's like, I was sitting in my house in Florida and crying watching the news. And being a kid who grew up in that war, hearing that really ticked me off. Right? Like I was also like really young then when we had this conversation because it was like, wait, you were in Florida. You had your family moved away from the war. You had a chance to raise your kids, right? And his kids ended up in a really bad shape because of how their marriage ended up being. And I was just angry at this person who was steering themselves up by watching this news. But at the same time, they were not helping anybody. Us watching the news, us retelling these stories is just recreating this emotion of anger and silence and kind of anger and division. Like the emotion of like, I am for this country, I agree with this country, I am. It's like, it's almost like if you look at social media here, I have a few people that are Russian now that I follow. They're getting so much stuff, just like a lot of Muslim people used to get so much hatred. They're not there. They're not fighting the war, but the energy of it all, the emotion behind it, the anger that people feel towards this is being transmitted. And that's why when the news is reported, news is about facts, right? News should be facts. News is many, 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 almost all of the times not facts. News is I find that there's very few news channels that are not two-sided, that are two-sided. They're usually like one-sided. They're cheering for one side. They're not giving all the facts. Because you cannot share only what's going on here. You have to share as news if you're sharing facts. This is what happened and this is what happened. And as a kid, I remember like the reports on some of the bigger cities. This was a disaster. This is how many lives were lost on this side, when the other side was never reported, right? This is like it's like the news represents stuff that they want you to hear, and then they ignore the stuff that you don't. But the stuff that's represented creates this hatred in people that are not even there and can tear up, as we've seen with pandemic. Too much pandemic news and too much like politics involved in pandemic tears up people, tears up connections. And that's what I don't like about it. It's not like if news did their job and is like, this is what's happening here and this is what's happening there, kind of as we talk about circumstances in coaching, if it was just a C line, I'd be cool with news. That's the news I like. But I get you. I understand we are all humans, but keeping in mind for everybody, like, you don't know all the sides of the story here.
And I think like something important to point out too is like, yeah, watch the news, but make sure you're intentional about it. And don't forget that guess what? The news is just doing their job. They are supposed to sensationalize. They are supposed to be telling all these stats, right? Like that's their job. But you also have a job. And your job is to remember your power and remember that you have a choice. Like, who do you want to watch the news from? You get to choose who you take in information from. And I think that's where what am I trying to say here? It's like the people who do get riled up by the news versus the people that don't. That's the difference.
Yes. Yes, it's like it's almost like if you're gonna watch the news, both sides of the stories. If you're gonna watch, like, hear all the facts, hear what everybody's saying, and you know, understand that it is news. And again, it is supposed to be facts, but news job of the news channel is to make sure that we watch news. So they have to induce, our basic mechanism for our brain for survival is to find fear and avoid it. So we're constantly looking for like danger, and we have that fear, and then we're trying to avoid it. So that's why we're addicted to watching news, because we need to survive, and in order to survive, news is going to tell us what's going on, so we avoid that and we make sure we survive. So yeah, we're wired, and they're using our wiring in a way to make sure that
Exactly. Yeah.
everybody's calling me to
So
sorry
like,
about.
no, that's like I never really understood like propaganda, but like with this event, like wow, I see it so clearly. It's almost like my eyes really opened, and I know that propaganda has been used forever, but to see it like oh my gosh, like wow, it's kind of crazy. But then I also know like it's like what I think of it, right? Like okay, this is I am determining that this is true, I am determining that this is false. But then like you're saying, there are some outlets that just straight up lie or only straight up tell this portion of a story. And to me, that is propaganda, then, right? Like you're trying to convince some people of a certain situation and you're not giving them the whole picture.
And it's not even that. It's the issue is not even like let's pretend that news are fine, but we share news, and we share clips of news, right? And we share and it's like you really have to have enough understanding and education to understand how certain systems work in different cultures in different countries. Russia is a whole different world that does not function like US, has a totally different system. So it's like we cannot assume stuff about it. Like understanding how the president works and what the laws are and everything, it's crucial to understand what's going on. But also it's the same for the other country. You're not gonna see, if you look at the current social media, for me it's fascinating. Um, what's shared. It's a lot of women in uniforms. It's a lot of women in uniforms with lipsticks, with perfect makeup on. It's a lot, and this brings me back to our war and to the pictures that were shared from our war. It was a lot of little children, and that just irks me so much. Using the vulnerable populations and the populations that people are going to feel sorry is always like something that's done, and it's just like, oof, I don't like this. Like I do not like this.
Yeah.
It tears you up because it's like, stop it, let them deal with it, stop it. You're interpreting it, and you're not interpreting it, with intention. You're just like grabbing onto straws and then throwing them away from you and sharing them with people in your circle, but you have no clue about facts.
It's like it it reminds me of like the highlight reel, right? Like what I share on Instagram, guess what? That's only part of my life. It's not the whole thing. Yeah, I'm an interior curator, right? So yeah, you see all the pretty pictures, but you don't see the whole backstory of what it took to get to this picture. And that's what is coming to my mind when we're talking about like the news and what people share. It's basically just like the highlight. And that's almost like it. They're trying to get like there's a point, there's a purpose to what they're sharing. And just the same as all other media creators, there's a purpose in what we're sharing. And so of course they're not going to share everything.
Yep, it is the highlight reel, and it's the specific things are shared for specific purpose. And that's regular people who do not understand politics, who do not, you know, understand laws. We're going to side with one side or the other. And then we're going to have hatred for the other side. Like, hatred. And it's kind of like baseless in the end, but that's what's happening right now. And like, my point is like, I'm not saying one side is good and one, like, again, there's no good or bad. If there's a war, everybody loses in my mind. Like, you're losing your people, you're losing the war. I don't care if you gain territory. I don't care if you like gain whatever you want. We were there. Serbia was under sanctions in 90s. Like, we could not get like we were under like everything was falling apart. We didn't have enough food. Like, it's like we were leading a war, and we were leading wars for generations, for territories, for this, for that, to be over this or over that. And it's just nonsense. It's like, you're losing your people. Stop it.
I know. If only everyone could
And I'm sure every person, it's like, from there is like, what nonsense are you saying? No, I'm sure not everybody. But people have pride in who they are and where they're from, and the fact that this used to be their territory. And I'm like, if we go back, all of these territories where everybody's at this point, stop it. And all it's just like, we forget history, we forget what happened, and then we just kind of like repeat it.
Yeah. Do you think it's repeated because like there is such, it's like a strong need for power? It's almost like power is a form of survival and I have to have it, and it's this like thing that makes me feel alive, and so I'm gonna like do it. So it's like innate, almost like I have to have power.
Somebody, and I'm gonna guess, I can't remember who now. Somebody said once, I heard it, it's not my idea, but they said people who feel like they have the least are the people who in theory have the most. But because they believe that they don't have enough, they're constantly taking more and more. And it's same with money and with power and with all of that. It's like,
Yeah,
when we don't think we have enough of something and we just want more and
that's
more, we're
weirdly
actually not thinking there's enough for everybody. We don't think that what we have is enough.
yeah, yeah.
But, let's jump into tips. I'm like, my tip number one is, if you guys are going to watch news, watch both sides. You get to choose what you believe. I'm not telling you. But I'm like, watch both sides. And I also am like, I don't believe in news. Like, let's be honest. I'm not a big believer in news in general, but if you will watch them, watch both sides. Cool. What about you?
So my first thing is like honor the emotions. I'm an emotional being. So like for all my emotional beings out there, like please just honor the emotions that come up within your body during this time. Like that's the best thing that you can do for yourself. Like don't avoid them, don't resist them, don't push them away. Like if you feel like crying, just let yourself. You want to like be angry, just be angry. Really allow all of those things to surface so that they can actually escape out of your body.
Okay. I actually did do that. Now that you're saying it, I'm like, oh my God, I did it. I shut down, and all that I did was listen to music. And it was very specific song. Like, when you're like going through emotions through the song. And I kept listening to this song that was kind of like, bringing up that sadness, bringing up that, like, and it took a few days to go through it now that we're talking about it. But what's the emotion that's coming up right now is uncertainty. And
Mm,
I feel what's happening in the world. I heard this once from Oprah. Um, Oprah said, this was me right around that wartime, maybe right after it actually. And I was watching Oprah, and I think it was winter in Chicago, and she was outside in the snow. I remember this. And Oprah's like, you know what? I don't know if she said God or universe or whatever she said. She's like, but you know what? God first taps you gently on the shoulder. and then taps you harder, and then like smacks you right on the back of your head. And if you're still not getting the message, if you're not hearing, then he drops a brick on your head. And I have a feeling what we're all getting right now is like kind of emotional intelligence, kind of learning for all of us, because we've gone through this pandemic and it seems that we haven't learned much, because we're getting another lesson right again. I mean, part of being human is part of getting lessons, but these are bricks. We're not being tapped on the shoulder right now. We're like having bricks thrown at our head, because right now we have uncertainty. And I think the worst emotion to human, even than fear and sadness and anger, is uncertainty, because we cannot settle in uncertainty. It eats us up, and it goes into anger, and it goes into sadness, and it goes into all of it. And these are uncertain times. We don't know what's going to happen. I I joked, but everybody got a little bit like, okay, that's not funny. But I'm like, you know what? We have been on this planet for a while. If there's a third world war, we might blow up this baby. And everybody's like, that is not a funny joke. I'm like, but don't you notice that we're getting like, what are you humans doing? Kind of like universe, God, whatever you guys say. Like, these are big events, historical events. They have not, like, there's always events, but these are really big and they're impacting a lot of the world. It's like, what's happening? What are we doing? What are we still doing? What do we care about? How are you living your life? When it's uncertainty, wake up. It's like, do you want to keep going in your life the way you've been going? Do you want to keep stressing about things you've been stressing? Do you want to keep, you know, all these patterns that you have? Like, wake up. What are we doing on this planet? Like machines, like robots, like that, sitting in that factory and just putting parts together day after day, day after day. I'm like, if this is anything, it's like, wake up, humans. Are you emotionally aware even what you're feeling? Like, are you happy the way that you're living? Are you satisfied? Are you accomplishing things that you want to? Yes, this was a big one. I'm like, I've gone far, but I feel like time of uncertainty is for us to wake up. And I want to ask everybody, is like, how are you living now? Like, my tip is like, when it's uncertain times, times of change, times of everything, like, really examine your life. Are you doing what you want to be doing? If this thing escalates and things turn bad and something happens, it's like, is this the life? Are you happy with how you've been going?
Yeah.
Do you want to keep going this way? Do you want to keep doing this normal? What are we doing?
So good. And I want to add on to this uncertainty because this is something that I've been dealing with in my own personal journey. It's so funny that you bring it up because before I hopped on here, I posted on Facebook and I said, I can still feel uncertain. I can feel uncertain and still trust that it'll work out because that's like my pattern. My pattern is that I feel uncertain. So then like I need to take that control. So then I'm going to try to control, try to do like take all the action, do what I need to do because I feel so uncertain. I think that I can control the outcome, which we all kind of know, like you can control a little bit, but the whole picture, no, you can't. So I just want to take it one step further and say like uncertainty, it doesn't need to stop you. And uncertainty is part of the process. And going back to Maria was saying about like, this is the time to examine yourself. And that's basically what I've done is I've examined how I deal with uncertain outcomes, uncertain circumstances, things where like I feel like I have little control over. And this is my conclusion that has kept popping up, like I don't need to be sure to move forward. And something that I've done for myself that I think would be helpful for you to do too is like think about all of the uncertain times in your life that you weren't sure about something, but then it just worked out. And I'm just going to give you a few examples so you know what I'm talking about. So I wasn't sure if like me and my husband would work out. Like I wasn't 100% sure. Yeah, I loved him, but I don't know if I didn't know that we're going to work out. But I still did it, and guess what? Like the outcome has been so beautiful. And the other thing, like childbearing, that is so scary. It is so uncertain. You don't know how the birth is going to go. You don't know how the kid's going to turn out, but you do it. You're uncertain. You still do it. You have that faith. You have that trust. And it somehow it works out. I mean, I feel like that with every phase of childhood. And then it's like the same thing in business. Like there is so much uncertainty, and it stopped me so many times. I mean, I stayed in a job that it just wasn't right for me for so long because that uncertainty just stopped me so much. But when it's like I finally just it's like I became one with the uncertainty, right? Like me and uncertainty finally became harmonious. Like we finally came to like some type of agreement that uncertainty is always going to be here and I can still do me. That's when I feel like my world just started flowing, vibing, so much like simpler in a sense.
Well, uncertainty is just an emotion. It's like we allow the uncertainty to take over our life. We are the ones that are like, oh, well, we can't do anything now until we see how this is gonna end. We shouldn't do this because this, like, we allow the uncertainty to take over. But what I'm saying, it's like when it's uncertain, because it is uncertain, examine, do you want to keep living this way? Because I think when uncertain times come, that's when shifts can happen easier than when we feel comfortable. Because it's really hard to get out of comfort zone for something. But if things are shaky already, then you have a chance to kind of like really examine it, and then because it is uncertain, then change something. Because now you have to question yourself about things that you did not have to question yourself about before. How
And
do you want to look at this situation?
I
What
think
if your family is on the other side of, for the other side and you're for this side? But like really examining, like, what if you're working for a company that's like supporting the war? I don't know. Like I'm saying, it's like things that like in your life right now, like where there's shaky,
yeah,
examining your life and being like, oh, okay. Even if
absolutely.
all of your life you've lived it the specific way, it's time to examine it and be like, why do I hate politics? Why do I not support either side? Or why do I support this side? Because sometimes we inherit our beliefs and we just go through lives doing things as we were told, as we were raised, as the society told us to. And we don't even know what we actually believe. We just took on that belief. And it's like, wait, really? As if people who live, sometimes I think people who live, for example, in this country, they're like, oh, yes, we love our country. But it's like, but wait, we don't even know how the other countries are. Like, we've just inherited that belief that we love our country and our country is the best. But it's like, you don't know about the other countries of the world. I was talking to my son about this the other day, and he was talking, we're Macedonian, we're American, and all of that stuff. And it's kind of like, it's now in my mind, it's like, they believe what we tell them, and that's what they go in life. But when it's shaky, you get to examine it because it brings up stuff to the surface. I always say, when I talk to people who are like supporters or not supporters of President Trump, because that was one of those things that I'm like, nope, not getting my hands in there. I always say, look, in my eyes, he was the best president ever. He brought up everything to the surface that we can now see. All the issues that were nicely under the rug, he brought them up. And that's the uncertainty, right? So then we can examine what's under the rug, because otherwise we just cover that nicely. And maybe it's time for world to examine under the what's under the rug. Maybe it's like in bigger picture it's time. Instead of jumping into I'm on this side or I'm on that side. Why are you on this side or on this side? Does there have to be a side? How are you living your life? Why are you believing these things? Do you want to keep living how you're living? Do, do you want to keep those beliefs? Okay, I can keep going about this forever. I'm just going to hand over the mic. I'm like, Coua, take over.
I think this has been like a really good conversation, and we really hope that you have enjoyed it. We would love to hear like your thoughts, your comments. If you
No, I wouldn't. I'm like, no, I said my piece. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm like, please, but just thoughts and comments
yeah.
about you and your life and how you're perceiving this. We're not going to divide sides. We're not going to do any of the actual, we're not going to get into political propaganda here and
Anything
say
is
this is right, this is wrong.
excess hate, like anything is welcome, but we don't stand for bullying, we don't stand for hate, anything like that. Please don't send to us. But
Yeah.
we'd love to hear like
It's like,
your
we love you
thoughts.
all. If you have hate
Your
and bullying, examine that, please. Why? Thank you all for watching and for listening.
thank you.
Bye.